Hercule Poirot confronts the chimeric stone gargoyles. Chapter 1. The inciting incident. The afternoon sun poured gold upon the sprawling grounds of Château de l'Écarlate, perched like a jewel amidst the lush French countryside. The estate's ancient stone walls and towering turrets cast long shadows over the manicured gardens, where the scent of blooming roses mingled with the faint whisper of history. It was a place of grandeur, of secrets buried beneath its carved gargoyles, stones that seemed to leer with mischief and menace. Inside the chateau's lavish drawing room, a small assembly of society's crème de la crèmes had gathered for the unveiling of a most curious artifact, the chimeric stone gargoyles, a set of grotesque sculptures rumored to possess a dark past. The event was hosted by the enigmatic Madame Claire Villiers, a wealthy widow known for her eccentric tastes and whispered connections to the occult. Guests sipped champagne, their chatter a mixture of admiration and veiled skepticism. Among them was the distinguished Dr. Émile Fournier, a respected archaeologist whose recent excavation had brought the gargoyles to light. Beside him stood his daughter, Celeste, a young woman with an intensity in her eyes that belied her delicate appearance. There was also Henri Duval, Madame Villiers' distant cousin, a shrewd financier with a penchant for gambling, the celebrated artist Marcel Beauregard, whose fame had soared with his dramatic canvases of myth and legend, and the elegant but inscrutable Madame Elise Montfort, whose sharp wit veiled a past few dared to question. As the clock chimed 4, the air shifted. Madame Villiers, draped in flowing black velvet, stepped forward with a flourish. "Mesdames et messieurs," she began, her voice low and hypnotic. "Today we witness not merely the unveiling of stone, but the awakening of a story long buried in shadow." With a dramatic sweep of her hand, she revealed the gargoyles perched atop their pedestal, their twisted forms frozen in eternal grimace. A ripple of awe passed through the room, yet beneath it lay an uneasy tension. The stones seemed almost alive, their glassy eyes catching the light in ways unsettlingly human. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the reverie. The guests turned toward the source, the grand staircase that spiraled upward to the private quarters. There, sprawled at the foot, lay the lifeless form of Dr. Émile Fournier. His eyes stared wide in frozen terror, a crimson stain blooming across his chest beneath a jagged wound. Madame Villiers gasped, clutching her chest. "Mon Dieu! Someone! Call for help!" Henri Duval rushed to the scene, but it was clear. Fournier was dead. The room descended into chaos. Celeste knelt beside her father, her sobs echoing like a haunting lament. Marcel Beauregard's face paled, while Madame Montfort's eyes narrowed, assessing every detail with clinical detachment. As the shock settled, murmurs rippled. Who could have done this? And why at such a gathering? Was the murder tied to the ancient curse whispered about the gargoyles, or was it a more earthly grudge, cloaked in the guise of superstition? Unbeknownst to all, a silent observer watched from the shadows, the keen mind of Hercule Poirot, summoned by a mysterious letter that hinted at trouble long before the fatal afternoon. For now, the chateau's stone gargoyles bore silent witness, their chimeric faces guarding secrets darker than any of the assembled guests dared imagine. The murder of Dr. Émile Fournier had transformed an afternoon of spectacle into a chilling puzzle. In the days to come, every whispered conversation and furtive glance would be a thread to unravel, threads that only Poirot's little grey cells could weave into truth. Chapter 2. The First Clues. The grand drawing room, once alive with laughter and clinking glasses, had become a scene of hushed whispers and restless glances. The guests, still trembling from the shock of Dr. Fournier's death, stood clustered near the hearth, each wrapped in their own swirling thoughts. Madame Villiers paced anxiously, her pale fingers twisting a delicate lace handkerchief, while Celeste sat stiffly on a velvet settee, her eyes fixed on the cold stone floor. Outside, the soft murmur of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of local authorities. Inspector Lefebvre, a man of austere demeanor and sharp eyes, entered promptly, accompanied by 2 constables. He nodded curtly to Madame Villiers, before turning his attention to the grim task. Poirot appeared quietly behind the inspector, his diminutive figure and immaculately groomed moustaches contrasting starkly with the heavy mood. He greeted Lefebvre with a slight bow, the sparkle in his eyes betraying a mind already at work. "I understand the unfortunate news, monsieur," Poirot said softly. "Murder in such surroundings is a tragedy indeed." Lefebvre nodded. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. We must examine the scene with care." The group moved toward Dr. Fournier's body, still sprawled near the base of the staircase. Poirot's gaze swept over the scene with practiced precision, the angle of the wound, the position of the body, the faint smear of blood on the polished banister. "What do we know so far?" Poirot inquired. "Dr. Fournier was found by Madame Villiers herself," Lefebvre replied. "No weapon has been found at the scene. The wound is consistent with a sharp blade, perhaps a dagger or knife." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And the time of death?" "Approximately an hour ago. We were alerted shortly after the scream." Poirot crouched near the body, eyes narrowing. His gloved fingers traced an invisible line in the air as he considered the facts. Then he turned to the gathering guests. "I would ask that none of you leave the chateau until we have spoken further." A ripple of unease spread, but Madame Villiers spoke quickly. "Of course. We shall all remain to assist." Poirot's eyes lingered on Celeste, whose pale face was now streaked with tears. "Mademoiselle, may I ask if you noticed anything unusual before the incident?" Celeste swallowed, composing herself. "No, Monsieur Poirot. Everything seemed normal. Father was admiring the gargoyles, and then this happened." Poirot's gaze flickered toward the sculptures once more. "These gargoyles, do they hold any significance to your father's work?" Dr. Fournier had been obsessed with their history, Celeste confirmed. He believed they were part of an ancient protective charm for the estate, though some dismissed it as superstition. "Superstition, yes," Poirot murmured. "But sometimes truth wears the mask of legend." Turning back to the room, Poirot's eyes settled briefly on Henri Duval, who shifted uneasily near the fireplace. The financier's sharp suit and clipped smile belied a man accustomed to control, but Poirot detected something beneath the surface, a flicker of impatience, perhaps fear. Poirot silently catalogued the guests' reactions. Marcel Beauregard's fingers drummed nervously against his thigh. Madame Montfort observed the scene with a cool detachment, eyes never resting in one place for too long. Inspector Lefebvre began a methodical search of the room, lifting cushions and inspecting the base of the gargoyle pedestal. Poirot's gaze followed his every move, noting with interest the absence of the weapon. Near the staircase, a faint scuff mark caught Poirot's attention, scratches on the polished floor as if dragged deliberately. "An intriguing detail," Poirot whispered. "Monsieur Lefebvre, have you observed these marks?" Lefebvre crouched, examining the scratches. "No, Monsieur Poirot. This could indicate a struggle." Poirot nodded, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Indeed, the killer was not only precise but confident enough to leave traces behind. Turning, Poirot approached the pedestal once more. His eyes scanned the stone gargoyles' chimeric forms, each grotesque face carved with painstaking detail. Suddenly, his gaze halted on the smallest figure, a gargoyle clutching what looked like a tiny dagger in its stony claws. "Remarkable," Poirot murmured. "A symbol, perhaps, or a warning." He pressed his finger gently against the base. Noting a slight discoloration, an almost imperceptible smear of dust that disturbed the otherwise pristine surface. "Someone has touched here recently," Poirot observed. "Possibly the murderer." As the afternoon waned, the room thickened with tension. The first clues were delicate and fragmented, yet Poirot's keen mind began to weave a pattern, one that suggested the killer was not merely opportunistic, but cunning and deliberate. Outside, a cold breeze stirred the leaves, and the stone gargoyles seemed to watch silently, as if guarding secrets that only the sharpest mind could unravel. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. The heavy oak doors of the chateau's grand dining hall closed with a measured thud behind the assembled guests. Inspector Lefebvre had insisted on a formal gathering, a controlled setting where no one might slip away unseen. The polished mahogany table stretched the length of the room, candles flickering softly in wrought iron holders, casting shadows that danced uneasily on the walls. Madame Villiers took her seat at the head of the table. A mask of composed grief settled upon her features. To her right sat Celeste Fournier, still pale but gathering strength, while the other guests arranged themselves with careful formality. Poirot stood quietly at the side, observing. His eyes were sharp, like a hawk's, missing no detail. Every twitch of a finger, every fleeting glance, every barely concealed sigh told a story. "Mesdames et messieurs," began Inspector Lefebvre, clearing his throat, "we are gathered here not merely to mourn, but to uncover the truth behind Dr. Fournier's death. Until this matter is resolved, no one is to leave the chateau." A chorus of reluctant nods followed. Poirot's gaze rested briefly on each person, silently marking their presence. Henri Duval, the financier, sat stiffly, fingers tapping a restless rhythm against his glass. He was a man used to wielding power, yet tonight there was a tension in his jaw that betrayed unease. Marcel Beauregard, the artist, lounged in his chair with an air of practiced nonchalance, though his eyes darted furtively around the room, restless and alert. Madame Elise Montfort, elegant and reserved, kept her hands folded demurely, lips pressed into a thin line. There was a hardness beneath her polished exterior, a sense of calculation. Poirot stepped forward, his voice soft yet commanding. "Mes amis, we must understand that in such a tragedy, the truth is often cloaked in shadows. Yet shadows, as we know, cannot hide forever." He turned to Celeste. "Mademoiselle, I wish to speak with you privately." Celeste nodded and followed him to a small adjoining salon, leaving the others to murmur among themselves. Once alone, Poirot's tone softened. "Tell me, mademoiselle, about your father's recent activities. Had he any disputes or perhaps enemies who wished him ill?" Celeste hesitated, eyes downcast. "My father was passionate about the Gargoyles, their history, and the secrets they might hold. He believed they were linked to the estate's past owners, families torn apart by greed and betrayal." "Did he mention any particular individuals who opposed his research?" She bit her lip. "Not directly, but he did grow anxious in the days before. This. He said some truths were dangerous." Poirot nodded slowly. Very intriguing. Back in the dining hall, the atmosphere thickened with tension. Madame Villiers addressed the group. Dr. Fournier's work was groundbreaking, but not without controversy. There are those who question the value of unearthing old secrets. Might such secrets best remain buried? Henri Duval shifted uncomfortably. "Madame, with all respect, progress requires the unveiling of truth. If there are threats to that truth, they should be confronted." Madame Montfort's eyes gleamed coldly. "Sometimes, Monsieur Duval, it is not the truth that kills, but the manner in which it is revealed." Marcel Beauregard leaned forward. "And what if the past itself holds the poison? Art reflects life, and life has a darkness we must face." Poirot interjected gently. "We are all actors in this drama, with roles to play and masks to wear. But beneath the masks, the true faces show through, in the smallest gesture, in the slightest hesitation. His gaze fell on Henri once more. Monsieur Duval, you appeared unsettled earlier. Might I ask about your relationship with Dr. Fournier? Henri's lips tightened. We had business dealings, minor but tense. Dr. Fournier was funding an excavation that I had financial interests in. There were disagreements over terms, nothing more. Poirot observed the man carefully. Disagreements that might motivate a desperate act. Henri's eyes flickered with irritation. Assure you, no. Madame Montfort offered a small smile, sharp as a dagger. Financial tensions are often the guise for deeper resentments. Poirot nodded appreciatively at her insight, but withheld judgment. The inspector began a round of questions. Who was last seen with Dr. Fournier before the incident? Marcel Beauregard replied quickly. I spoke with him briefly by the garden. He seemed preoccupied, but in good spirits. Celeste added softly. He was with Madame Villiers just before the unveiling. Madame Villiers nodded. Yes, he was excited, though I sensed a shadow of worry. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And the gargoyles themselves. Has anyone handled or moved them recently? A servant entered with a silver tray, and the moment passed. Poirot caught a faint glimmer on the floor near the pedestal. A scuff mark here, he murmured, kneeling. Evidence of disturbance. Inspector Lefebvre took note. Poirot rose, addressing the room. Friends, we face a puzzle where each piece conceals a secret. I intend to speak with each of you individually. It is in these conversations that the truth will emerge. A murmur of assent rippled through the group, though some faces tightened in apprehension. As the evening deepened, the chateau settled into a fragile quiet. The stone gargoyles stood sentinel, their twisted visages seeming to watch with a knowing gaze, as if privy to secrets still veiled. And amidst them, Poirot's mind whirred, piecing together the fragments of a mystery that would test his famed little grey cells to their utmost. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. The late afternoon light slanted through the tall windows of Château de l'Écarlate as Hercule Poirot made his entrance. The soft click of his polished shoes on the marble floor echoed lightly, drawing the eyes of the assembled guests and local authorities alike. He moved with that unmistakable air of meticulous grace, small in stature but commanding in presence. His perfectly waxed mustaches twitched slightly as he surveyed the room with a penetrating gaze. Inspector Lefebvre stepped forward, offering a courteous nod. Monsieur Poirot, we are grateful you have come so promptly. Poirot inclined his head, a slight smile playing at his lips. It is always a pleasure to serve justice, monsieur. I've received your letter and felt it prudent to arrive without delay. Madame Villiers approached, her composure unwavering despite the tragic circumstances. Monsieur Poirot, the guests and I await your wisdom. This dreadful murder has cast a pall over us all. Poirot's eyes swept across the faces. The stoic grief of Celeste Fournier, the guarded expressions of Henri Duval and Madame Montfort, the restless energy of Marcel Beauregard. Each bore the invisible marks of tension and suspicion. He began deliberately, his voice calm yet precise. First, I must express my deepest condolences to the family of Dr. Fournier. But now, the matter at hand demands our utmost attention. The little grey cells must be put to work. Walking slowly to the crime scene near the grand staircase, Poirot crouched and studied the position of the body and the nature of the wound. He noted the absence of any weapon, the slight smear of blood on the banister, and the faint scratches on the polished floor nearby. He looked up to meet Lefebvre's eyes. Tell me, Inspector, has anyone touched anything since the discovery? Only to tend to the body and secure the scene, Monsieur Poirot, Lefebvre replied. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Good. We must preserve every detail, however small. Turning toward the guests, Poirot's gaze rested momentarily on Henri Duval. A flicker of something, nervousness perhaps, passed over the financier's face before he masked it with a polite smile. Poirot's sharp mind catalogued every detail, the way Marcel Beauregard's fingers twitched, the guarded composure of Madame Montfort, even the subtle tremor in Madame Villiers' hands as she clutched her fan. "Madame Villiers," Poirot said, "I understand this gathering was to celebrate the unveiling of the Gargoyles." "Yes," she replied, "a momentous occasion, now marred by tragedy." "And these Gargoyles," Poirot mused, "do they hold particular significance for Dr. Fournier?" Celeste, nearby, spoke softly. "Father believed they were connected to the estate's darker history, symbols of protection, but also of warning." Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, the dual nature of such artifacts, both guardian and omen. Intriguing. He turned his attention to the other guests. "If I may, I wish to understand each of your relationships with Dr. Fournier. Such matters often reveal threads unseen at first glance." Henri Duval was the first to speak. "We had financial dealings, a partnership of sorts. Disagreements, yes, but nothing beyond business." Madame Montfort's voice was cool and measured. "I was acquainted with Dr. Fournier through Madame Villiers. Our interactions were limited." Marcel Beauregard interjected with a nervous laugh. "I admired his passion, though we sometimes debated the artistic merit of his archaeological pursuits." Poirot smiled faintly. "And what of the timing? Who was with him just before the tragedy?" Madame Villiers responded. "He spoke with me briefly, then wandered to admire the sculptures." Poirot's gaze shifted to the gargoyles, their grotesque forms perched silently. "It is curious that such an ancient symbol should be linked to a modern murder." He paused, then addressed the group gravely. "Allow me to state plainly. I do not believe this was a random act. The precision of the wound and the absence of a weapon suggest a killer confident and meticulous." The room fell silent, save for the ticking of an antique clock on the wall. Poirot continued. "Moreover, the scratches near the staircase imply a struggle or perhaps a deliberate attempt to mislead. Every detail must be examined closely." He approached Madame Villiers again. "May I inquire if anyone had reason to wish Dr. Fournier harm?" Her lips tightened. "Not openly, but there are always undercurrents, old jealousies, financial pressures, secrets best left unspoken." Celeste shivered slightly. "Father received anonymous letters warning him to stop his research." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Letters? An important clue." He then turned to Inspector Lefebvre. "I shall conduct interviews with each guest. Patience and observation will reveal the cracks beneath the polished surface." As the evening deepened, the guests dispersed into smaller groups, their polite facades masking a growing unease. Poirot's gaze lingered on the gargoyles, their chimeric faces frozen in eternal grimace, as if daring him to unravel their silent riddle. With the precision of a master chess player, Poirot began to place his pieces. Each conversation another move in the game of truth and deception. The night promised secrets yet to be uncovered, and Poirot's little grey cells were ready for the challenge. Chapter 5. Initial Interviews. The chateau's expansive library had been converted into a makeshift interview room. Walls lined with ancient tomes and heavy curtains muted the sounds from the rest of the estate. A low fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the faces gathered there, each guest awaiting their turn under Poirot's keen scrutiny. The first to sit before him was Henri Duval, the financier whose sharp eyes betrayed his unease beneath his practiced calm. Poirot regarded him quietly for a moment, then began. "Monsieur Duval, you mentioned earlier a business relationship with Dr. Fournier. Pray, elaborate on this." Henri exhaled slowly. "It was a matter of funding. I invested in one of his expeditions, but we had disagreements over costs and management. Nothing beyond professional friction." "And did you express these disagreements openly?" Poirot asked, tapping his fingers lightly. "Certainly," Henri replied, "but I would never harm the man." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Did anyone else know about these disputes?" "Only Madame Villiers," he answered, eyes briefly flicking toward the door. Next, Madame Elise Montfort was invited in. Her demeanor was composed, almost regal. Poirot observed the subtle tension in her jaw. "Madame Montfort, your connection to Dr. Fournier seems minimal, yet you were present at the unveiling. What drew you here?" She smiled thinly. "Curiosity, Monsieur Poirot. The chateau's history has long fascinated me, as has the allure of the unknown. Were you aware of Dr. Fournier's research into the gargoyles?" "I had heard whispers," she said cautiously. "Rumors of family secrets and curses. I prefer to keep an open mind." Poirot leaned in slightly. "Did you notice anything unusual that day? Any interaction with the doctor that stood out?" Her eyes flickered. "Nothing overt. But one must pay attention to what is left unsaid." Marcel Beauregard was next. He entered with a nervous energy, eyes bright but wary. "Monsieur Beauregard, your relationship with Dr. Fournier was more spirited, I understand." Marcel chuckled, rubbing his hands. "Indeed. We often debated the significance of art versus archaeology. He was a man of facts, I of feeling. Did your disagreements ever become heated?" "Rarely," Marcel admitted. "But passion can be misunderstood." Poirot's gaze was steady. "Where were you at the time of the murder?" "In the garden, sketching the gargoyles," Marcel said, though a faint redness tinged his cheeks. Celeste Fournier was last. She entered the room with quiet grace, but eyes shadowed with grief. "Mademoiselle, I know this is difficult, but please tell me about your father's recent state of mind." Celeste swallowed hard. He was obsessed with the past, with secrets that some would prefer remain buried. He mentioned receiving letters, warnings to stop his research. "Do you know who might have sent them?" "No. He kept it to himself." Poirot's brow furrowed. "And did he express fear?" "More of a sense of urgency. The time was running out." The interviews, though polite, were charged with undercurrents of tension. Poirot noticed contradictions, not overt lies, but subtle inconsistencies. Henri claimed little personal animosity, yet his body language suggested otherwise. Madame Montfort spoke carefully, guarding secrets behind her poised exterior. Marcel's nervousness hinted at concealed guilt or fear. Celeste's grief was genuine, yet her answers were sometimes too measured. Poirot reflected silently. Each suspect held a motive, and each concealed something vital. After the last interview, Poirot retired to a quiet corner, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "The mind is a labyrinth, and these walls contain many hidden doors." Inspector Lefebvre approached. "Do you believe any one of them is the murderer?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "Not yet. The truth is cloaked in shadows, but every shadow is cast by light." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock. A servant entered, handing Poirot a small envelope sealed with black wax. Poirot broke the seal and read the brief note inside. "The past will not rest. Look beneath the stone where the night's breath lingers." A chill passed through the room. "Curious," Poirot said. "It seems the game is far from over." Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and the stone gargoyles stood sentinel, their grotesque faces silent witnesses to secrets yet untold. Chapter 6. The First False Lead. The following morning dawned with a heavy mist that clung to the gardens of Château de l'Écarlate, muffling sounds and casting the estate in a ghostly pallor. Within the house, tension simmered beneath a facade of polite civility, the guests each bearing the invisible weight of suspicion. Poirot sat in the sitting room, the cryptic note pressed carefully between his fingers. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully as he pondered the message. "Look beneath the stone where the night's breath lingers." The phrase was a riddle, a veiled hint, but to what end? Before he could dwell further, Inspector Lefebvre entered briskly, a folder of papers in hand. "Monsieur Poirot, we have news that may interest you." Poirot gestured for him to continue. "The night of the murder," Lefebvre began, "a local poacher was apprehended in the nearby woods with a bloodied knife in his possession. He was found near a clearing not far from the chateau." Poirot raised an eyebrow, a most fortuitous coincidence. Indeed, the man claims he stumbled upon the body, but fled in panic. He has no alibi for the time of the death. Poirot's fingers drummed lightly on the table. "And this man, what is his name?" "Jean Morel, a known troublemaker, but of little standing in the community." The inspector produced a hastily drawn sketch of the knife. "The blade matches the wound on Dr. Fournier." Poirot studied the image with keen interest. "Curious. And yet, Lefebvre prompted. "Yet coincidence is the refuge of the guilty," Poirot said softly. "We must see this man for ourselves." They summoned Jean Morel to the chateau. The poacher arrived disheveled and wary, his eyes flicking nervously around the room. Poirot observed him carefully. "Monsieur Morel, you were found near the chateau the night Dr. Fournier was killed, with a knife stained in blood." Jean swallowed, his voice rough. "I found the body. I didn't kill him. I swear it. I was scared and ran." "Can anyone confirm your whereabouts that evening?" Jean shook his head. "No, I keep to myself." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Do you know anyone who might wish harm upon Dr. Fournier?" The man hesitated. "No, but I've heard talk of curses. Things best left alone." Lefebvre leaned forward. "Where were you exactly when you found the body?" "In the woods, near the old stone wall," Jean said. "It's where the cold wind blows at night, the night's breath, some call it." Poirot's eyes flickered with recognition. The note, "Where the night's breath lingers," could that refer to this stone wall? Jean nodded. "Yes, an ancient part of the estate." With a sigh, Lefebvre said, "This looks promising." Poirot remained silent, his mind racing through possibilities. Later, in the courtyard, Jean Morel was confronted by the assembled guests. His ragged appearance and lack of alibi made him a convenient scapegoat. Henri Duval voiced his conviction. "The evidence is clear. The man was caught red-handed." Madame Montfort shook her head. "We must not rush to judgment." But suspicion rippled through the group like wildfire. Poirot excused himself and wandered toward the Gargoyles once more. He crouched by the stone wall near the woods, brushing away fallen leaves. Beneath lay nothing but dirt and moss. No weapon, no clue. Returning indoors, Poirot confronted Lefebvre. "Inspector, we must not be so quick to pin the crime on Monsieur Morel. The poacher's presence here may be explained by fear or coincidence. The true killer is more cunning." Lefebvre frowned. "But the knife?" Poirot interrupted gently. "A blade is a common thing. Easily found, easily planted. The murderer desires our attention elsewhere." He paused, eyes gleaming. "The scratches near the staircase, the cryptic note, these are deliberate misdirections." As the afternoon waned, tension mounted. The false lead had cast a shadow of relief and accusation in equal measure, but Poirot's instincts warned him that the real culprit remained concealed. Celeste approached quietly. "Monsieur Poirot, do you truly believe Jean Morel is innocent?" Poirot smiled kindly. "Mon enfant, in a game of shadows, one must be cautious not to be blinded by the obvious." Outside, the wind stirred the stone gargoyles, their twisted faces seeming to smirk with sinister amusement. The truth was still cloaked in darkness, waiting for the patient mind to uncover. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. The atmosphere within Château de l'Écarlate grew taut as the days passed, each moment laden with unspoken accusations and simmering distrust. Hercule Poirot, ever the master of subtlety, began to weave a delicate psychological web, carefully laying verbal traps to unsettle the suspects and draw forth their hidden truth. In the drawing room, Poirot arranged a small gathering. Henri Duval, Marcel Beauregard, Madame Montfort, and Madame Villiers took their seats, each guarded, each aware that Poirot's questions were not mere pleasantries, but probes into the soul. "Mes amis," Poirot began, voice gentle but firm, "when one seeks the truth, one must first understand the mind. Often it is not what is said, but what is left unsaid that betrays us." He fixed his gaze on Henri. "Monsieur Duval, earlier you mentioned your financial disagreements with Dr. Fournier. Can you tell me more about these?" Henri's jaw tightened. "Business is business, Monsieur Poirot. There were disagreements, yes, but they were resolved." Poirot smiled faintly. "Yet you appeared restless during our last meeting. Your fingers tapped anxiously. Tell me, does money weigh heavily upon your conscience?" Henri's eyes flickered with irritation. "I will not be accused without evidence." Poirot inclined his head. "No accusation, only observation." Turning to Marcel, Poirot asked, "And you, Monsieur Beauregard, what is the true nature of your relationship with the deceased?" Marcel shifted, rubbing his hands. "We were friends, though I admit tensions existed. He disapproved of my methods, my focus on the abstract rather than concrete facts." "And did this disapproval ever turn personal?" Poirot inquired. Marcel's eyes darkened. "Perhaps. We clashed more than once." Poirot's gaze then settled on Madame Montfort. "Madame, your demeanor is composed, almost impervious. Yet I sense a storm beneath. What secrets do you harbor?" She met his eyes evenly. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm no stranger to storms, but I am no murderer." The room held its breath. Poirot's voice softened. "No, but you understand the power of silence. Sometimes it shields, sometimes it condemns." He paused, then continued. "The note I received mentioned the night's breath, a phrase also used by the poacher Jean Morel. It hints at a place on this estate, a stone wall where the cold wind blows." Madame Villiers stiffened, her eyes darting briefly toward a shadowed corner. Poirot pressed on. "Dr. Fournier's obsession with the past has stirred many. Old grievances, long-forgotten debts, jealousies, all may have led to this tragedy." He let the silence settle before speaking again. "Monsieur Duval, I heard whispers of your involvement in a recent acquisition of land near the estate. Land Dr. Fournier opposed selling." Henri's face darkened. "That is a private matter and unrelated." Poirot smiled thinly. "Ah, but private matters often conceal public consequences." He turned to Marcel. "Your art, monsieur, is dramatic and evocative. Do you think your emotions might have clouded your judgment?" Marcel's fingers clenched. "I'm an artist, not a killer." Poirot nodded. "Indeed. But passion can be a double-edged sword." The conversation shifted then to more subtle terrain. Poirot skillfully evoked memories and tensions, watching closely as the guests revealed cracks in their facades. Henri's irritation grew palpable. Madame Montfort's coolness barely concealed impatience. Marcel's nervous energy increased. Later, alone with Madame Villiers, Poirot spoke softly. "Madame, your connections are many, and your knowledge is deeper than you admit. Are there shadows in your past that may have intersected with Dr. Fournier's pursuits?" She met his gaze steadily. "Secrets are currency in this world, Monsieur Poirot. Some debts demand payment." Poirot smiled knowingly. "Indeed, and some debts are paid with blood." Back in the drawing room, a subtle shift had taken place. Suspicion had begun to eat away at the bonds between the guests. Alliances formed and dissolved in whispered conversations, eyes narrowing with distrust. Poirot allowed the tension to build, understanding that under pressure, truth often bubbled to the surface. As evening fell, he retreated to the stone gargoyles, their twisted faces illuminated by the moonlight. He studied their grotesque forms, contemplating the psychological labyrinth he had entered. The mind is a labyrinth, and each suspect is a winding path, Poirot murmured. To solve this, I must follow the smallest thread, for the killer's weakness lies hidden in the mind's darkest corner. The night air was cold and still. The chateau held its breath, awaiting the unraveling of secrets that only Poirot's little grey cells could uncover. Chapter 8. A Secondary Mystery. The uneasy calm that had settled over Chateau de l'Écarlate was shattered before dawn by an urgent summons. Madame Villiers, pale and trembling, rushed to find Poirot in the great hall. "Monsieur Poirot, another incident. Something dreadful has occurred," she gasped. Without hesitation, Poirot followed her to the east wing, where a small study had been hastily prepared as a workspace for Dr. Fournier. The room was in disarray, papers scattered, drawers left open, and the heavy scent of spilled ink hung in the air. At the center of the chaos lay a shattered glass vial, its contents a dark, viscous liquid, seeping slowly across the polished oak desk. Madame Villiers pointed to a heavy brass letter opener, its tip stained crimson, discarded beside the spill. Poirot's eyes narrowed. An attempted poisoning. Perhaps. Celeste Fournier arrived, distraught. "I found this when I came to collect some of Father's notes. Someone has been here, destroying his work." Poirot bent to examine the fragments of broken glass and the staining on the wood. Indeed, the liquid appears to be a potent toxin. Had it been ingested, the outcome might have been fatal. Inspector Lefebvre entered shortly thereafter. "We will secure the area and question the staff. No one is allowed to enter or leave the chateau without permission." Poirot nodded approvingly. "Good. This secondary act speaks volumes. The murderer is desperate to conceal something, perhaps evidence hidden within Dr. Fournier's research." Madame Montfort, who had arrived unannounced, observed quietly. "Such desperation indicates that the truth lies deeper than mere personal vendetta." Henri Duval frowned. What could be so important in those papers? Marcel Beauregard glanced at the scattered documents. There are references to a missing will, one that could alter inheritance and ownership of the estate. Poirot's interest piqued. A will, the motive expands beyond murder to encompass greed and power. He began to carefully gather fragments of torn paper, his fingers deft despite the tension. Celeste looked around anxiously. Father believed the will was hidden somewhere on the grounds, perhaps near the gargoyles. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The stone guardians may conceal more than mere superstition. The group moved outside where the morning mist clung stubbornly to the gardens. Poirot led them toward the ancient stone wall mentioned in the cryptic note. He knelt, brushing away moss and debris from a narrow crevice. "Here," he murmured, "lies the key to the puzzle." With effort, he pried loose a small stone, revealing a folded parchment sealed with a crimson ribbon. He handed it to Celeste, who carefully broke the seal and unfolded the delicate paper. Her eyes widened. "It is Father's diary, notes on his discoveries and suspicions. He believed someone close was sabotaging his work." Poirot's gaze swept over the assembled faces. The murderer is not only cunning, but close at hand. The diary revealed clues pointing to a secret chamber beneath the chateau, accessible through a hidden passage near the gargoyles. Madame Villiers paled. "A secret chamber? But why was it hidden?" Celeste whispered. "Perhaps to protect what lies within." As Poirot pondered the new revelations, the wind stirred, and the stone gargoyles seemed to watch with grim satisfaction. The secondary mystery, the attempted poisoning, the missing will, the secret chamber, had added layers of complexity to an already tangled web. Poirot's mind raced. The pieces were assembling, but the final picture remained elusive. Inspector Lefebvre broke the silence. "Monsieur Poirot, what is your next move?" Poirot looked toward the looming silhouette of the chateau. "To enter the shadows beneath, where truth hides. But caution is paramount." He turned to Celeste. "You shall accompany me, mademoiselle. Your father's knowledge may be the lantern that guides us." As they prepared to descend into the unknown, the chateau's ancient stones seemed to pulse with silent secrets. The night was far from over, and the heart of the mystery lay waiting in darkness. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The flickering flame of a single lantern cast dancing shadows against the damp stone walls as Poirot and Celeste descended the narrow staircase, hidden behind the ancient gargoyles. The air was thick with the scent of earth and forgotten time, each step echoing softly in the confined space. Celeste's fingers trembled slightly as she clutched the fragile diary, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. "Mon Dieu, Monsieur Poirot," she whispered. "This place, it is like another world beneath the chateau." Poirot nodded, his small frame poised with quiet resolve. "Indeed, mademoiselle, in the depths of the past lie the secrets that so many wish to keep buried." They reached the bottom of the stairwell, entering a vaulted chamber lined with dusty shelves and cobwebbed artifacts. Maps and faded documents cluttered a rough wooden table, their edges curled with age. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he surveyed the scene. Here is where Dr. Fournier spent his final days, piecing together truths that others feared. Celeste carefully opened the diary to a bookmarked page, reading aloud. "The Villiers family secret runs deeper than blood and title. Henri Duval is not merely a financier, he is the illegitimate heir to this estate, hidden from public knowledge to protect reputations." Poirot's eyebrows rose. A revelation indeed. Suddenly, footsteps echoed above. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "We are not alone." They hurried back up the stairs, extinguishing the lantern's flame to merge with the shadows above. As they reached the library, they found Inspector Lefebvre conferring quietly with Madame Montfort. "Madame," Poirot began, "I have discovered something that complicates matters. Henri Duval's connection to this estate is more personal than he admits." Madame Montfort's eyes flickered, but her expression remained unreadable. Such secrets often breed resentment and motive. Celeste looked toward Henri, who stood nearby, his face a mask of controlled calm. Poirot approached him gently. "Monsieur Duval, the diary suggests a hidden lineage, one you have concealed." Henri's lips pressed thin. "That is a baseless accusation." Poirot smiled faintly. "Is it? Or a motive concealed behind wealth and silence?" The room tensed. Marcel Beauregard stepped forward. "If Henri stands to inherit, might that explain the hostility toward Dr. Fournier's research?" Henri's eyes darkened. "I deny any involvement." Madame Villiers spoke softly. "The past is a tangled web. Alliances and betrayals intertwine in ways even we do not comprehend." Poirot nodded. "Indeed. And financial stakes often sharpen the edges of human nature." He turned to Celeste. "Are there others who might benefit from Dr. Fournier's silence?" Celeste hesitated. "Madame Montfort has been a frequent visitor here, often in the company of Monsieur Duval." Madame Montfort's gaze was cool. "Frequent visitors often share common interests." Poirot's mind raced. The relationships among the guests were more entangled than first suspected. Old rivalries, concealed desires, and hidden alliances. He motioned to Inspector Lefebvre. "We must investigate these connections further. The threads of this mystery weave through the hearts of those gathered here." Later, as night fell, Poirot requested a private meeting with the suspects. In the grand salon, the guests gathered, faces marked with unease. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, "we have uncovered that many of you share more than mere acquaintance. Family ties, business interests, and long-held grievances all form the tapestry of this crime." He fixed his gaze on Henri. "Your secret heritage gives you motive, but it also places you at risk." Henri's voice was steady but cold. "I have done nothing wrong." Poirot's eyes moved to Madame Montfort. "And your frequent visits suggest knowledge you have withheld." She smiled faintly. "Monsieur Poirot, suspicion is a dangerous game." Marcel added, "And passion is an even more dangerous fuel." Poirot allowed a moment of silence before continuing. "The diary speaks of a missing will, a secret chamber, and a battle for inheritance. These are no mere coincidences." He paced slowly. "The murderer is among us, weaving deception, but every website has a weakness." As the guests exchanged wary glances, the storm outside began to gather, rain tapping rhythmically against the windows. Poirot concluded, "Tonight, secrets will be tested. Truth will demand sacrifice." Outside, the stone gargoyles loomed, their twisted visages seeming to snare at the unfolding human drama below. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue. The chateau lay cloaked in silence, save for the steady patter of rain against the leaded glass windows. Inside, Poirot sat quietly in his study, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the room. He held in his hand a small, seemingly insignificant object, a silver cufflink engraved with the Villiers family crest. It had been found beneath the body of Dr. Fournier. The discovery had come from a discreet search of the crime scene, unnoticed by others, but immediately seized upon by Poirot's keen eye. "Such a trifle," he murmured, "and yet it speaks volumes." Inspector Lefebvre stood nearby, watching with a mix of curiosity and impatience. "Do you believe this belongs to the murderer?" Lefebvre asked. Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but more importantly, it belongs to someone present in the house, someone who wishes to remain unseen." He tapped the cufflink gently. "It was lost in haste, a small slip that betrays a greater secret." Poirot recalled the earlier interviews and the subtle tensions he had observed. The cufflink's design was rare, typically worn only by those of the Villiers lineage or close affiliates. He pondered Madame Villiers' pale fingers clutching her handkerchief during their last conversation, the quick glance Henri Duval cast when the item was mentioned, and Madame Montfort's sudden shift in demeanor. His little grey cells worked with relentless precision, connecting threads invisible to others. Poirot rose and paced the room, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "The killer is meticulous, but not infallible. They seek to hide behind shadows of family and loyalty, yet this cufflink reveals their true identity." He turned to Lefebvre. "Keep this discovery confidential. We must use it as a strategic advantage." Later, Poirot convened a private meeting with Céleste Fournier. "Mademoiselle, I entrust you with this knowledge," he said, placing the cufflink in her hand. "Your father's death is intertwined with secrets that run deep." Céleste's eyes shimmered with tears. "Monsieur Poirot, how can I aid you in revealing the truth?" "Patience and vigilance," he replied. "Observe carefully those around you. Their smallest gestures may betray guilt." That evening, Poirot gathered the suspects in the grand salon once more. His demeanor was calm, but resolute. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I have found a clue. A token left behind, unintentionally, by the one who committed this crime." He held up the silver cufflink for all to see. A gasp rippled through the room. Poirot's gaze swept the faces. "This cufflink bears the Villiers crest, linking the murderer not just to this estate, but to the very heart of its secrets." Madame Villiers paled, clutching the arm of her chair. Henri Duval's lips pressed into a thin line and Madame Montfort's eyes narrowed sharply. Poirot continued. This small object was dropped in the struggle, a mistake born of haste or overconfidence. It reveals a connection that some hoped to keep hidden. He let the silence settle before adding, "It is not merely blood that stains this house, but betrayal woven into the fabric of family." Marcel Beauregard broke the silence. "Monsieur Poirot, does this mean the murderer is among us, cloaked in trust and legacy?" "Precisely," Poirot said, "and their fatal error is believing that such masks are impermeable." As the guests digested the revelation, Poirot's mind raced ahead. The pieces of the puzzle were converging, but the final picture remained obscured by layers of deception. Outside, the stone gargoyles loomed in the moonlight, their grotesque faces frozen in eternal judgment. Poirot whispered to himself, "The time is near. The little grey cells shall soon illuminate the truth." Chapter 11. Tensions rise. The revelation of the silver cufflink bearing the Villiers crest sent ripples through the gathering at Chateau de l'Écarlate. The atmosphere thickened as suspicion sharpened like a blade, slicing through the delicate veneer of civility that had so far held the guests together. Madame Villiers sat stiffly, her pale face drawn taut. Henri Duval paced near the fireplace, his usual composure faltering. Madame Montfort's eyes glittered with cold calculation, and Marcel Beauregard's restless fingers betrayed growing anxiety. Poirot observed quietly, allowing the tension to build, knowing well that such pressure often caused masks to slip. Henri finally broke the silence. "This is a gross accusation. I have my own reputation to protect." Madame Montfort's voice was smooth but sharp. "Reputations are fragile things, Monsieur Duval, but they can be shattered when secrets are laid bare." Marcel's gaze flickered between them. "And what of trust? Can it survive such revelations?" Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm but authoritative. "Trust is earned, Monsieur Beauregard, and tonight we test its true measure." He turned toward Madame Villiers. "Madame, your family's crest on this cufflink ties the murderer to your lineage. How do you explain this?" Madame Villiers swallowed hard. I cannot, but I swear I would never harm Dr. Fournier." Celeste stood beside her mother, her voice trembling but resolute. "I believe my mother speaks the truth, but someone here is hiding something." Poirot nodded approvingly. "Indeed, mademoiselle, it is in the hidden corners of the heart where guilt often festers." Inspector Lefebvre cleared his throat. "We must consider the possibility of alliances. Some of you may be protecting others or manipulating the situation." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Poirot's gaze sharpened on Henri. "Monsieur Duval, you once denied knowledge of a secret heritage. Yet this cufflink suggests otherwise. Why the deception?" Henri's face flushed. "To protect my family name, to avoid scandal." "And what price are you willing to pay to keep it?" Poirot asked quietly. Henri's eyes flashed. "Whatever it takes," Madame Montfort interjected. "Secrets do not die quietly, Monsieur Duval. They demand reckoning." Marcel's voice grew louder, tension breaking free. "Enough. We circle each other like predators, but the truth lies beyond this petty bickering." Poirot held up a hand. "Patience, Monsieur Beauregard. The truth is a slow flame, not a sudden blaze." He paced slowly, eyes scanning the faces. "I see alliances forming, accusations whispered behind backs, but the murderer is among us still, watching and waiting." Celeste's voice was firm. "We must find the missing will. It may hold the key to unraveling this mess." Poirot agreed. "Yes, the will is a vital piece. Whoever controls it controls power and motive." He moved toward the window, watching the rain cascade down the panes. "The shadows deepen, but the light of truth will pierce them." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the adjoining room. All heads turned sharply. They rushed to find the library in disarray, books strewn across the floor, a broken vase, and a hastily discarded piece of parchment near the fireplace. Poirot picked up the parchment carefully. It was a fragment of a letter, torn and stained. Madame Villiers gasped. "Someone is trying to destroy evidence." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And with it, our hope of justice." The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Trust was crumbling, and fear took its place. Poirot addressed them solemnly. "We stand on the edge of revelation and chaos. Each of you must decide where your loyalties lie, with truth or deception." As the storm outside raged, the chateau held its breath. The game was nearing its climax, and Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly to catch the unseen thread that would unravel the entire mystery. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. The grand salon was charged with a nervous energy as Hercule Poirot gathered the guests once more. Each face was taut with anticipation, eyes flickering with suspicion and concealed dread. The rain outside had ceased, leaving the world damp and heavy, as if the chateau itself waited with bated breath. Poirot stood before the assembled group, his small frame commanding silence with a mere glance. His voice was calm, yet every word cut sharply through the tension. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have reached a critical moment. The pieces of the puzzle are assembled and the picture becomes clear." He paced slowly, eyes glinting. "In this room stands a person whose carefully woven fabric of lies is unraveling. It is not the obvious, but the subtle contradictions that betray." Poirot turned his gaze towards Henri Duval. The financier's face was pale, jaw clenched, fingers twitching. "Monsieur Duval," Poirot began, "you denied knowledge of the Villiers lineage, yet the cufflink found at the crime scene bears your family's crest." Henri's voice was strained. "I concealed it to protect my reputation, but I did not kill Dr. Fournier." "Ah, but deception is the first step toward guilt," Poirot replied smoothly. Turning to Madame Montfort, he continued, "Madame, your frequent visits to the chateau and your ties to both Villiers and Duval families give you motive. You would stand to gain much from Dr. Fournier's silence." Madame Montfort's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained poised. "Accusations without proof are meaningless." Poirot smiled faintly. "Yet proof is within reach." He lifted the torn letter fragment discovered earlier. This letter, torn in haste, reveals plans to alter the inheritance and hints at a meeting near the secret chamber. All eyes shifted to Madame Villiers, whose face now was a mask of tension. Poirot stepped closer. "Madame Villiers, you are no mere bystander. Your knowledge of the estate's secrets and your influence over its affairs are well known." She swallowed hard. "I sought only to protect my family's legacy." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And to do so, you silenced Dr. Fournier before his revelations could unravel your carefully held facade." A sharp gasp came from Celeste, who stood firm. "Mother, no." Poirot's gaze softened momentarily. "Mademoiselle, you have suffered much, but the truth spares no one." He faced the room once more. Monsieur Duval attempted to conceal his identity. Madame Montfort sought to preserve power. Madame Villiers manipulated secrets. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. But there is one who faltered most, who made a crucial mistake that betrayed their knowledge of the crime. Poirot's eyes fixed on Marcel Beauregard. The artist's usual bravado was gone, replaced by visible tension. "Monsieur Beauregard," Poirot said quietly, "you claim to be in the garden sketching, yet your fingerprints were found on the letter opener used in the attempted poisoning." Marcel's hands trembled. I touched it to move it aside. I did not intend harm." "Intent is irrelevant to justice," Poirot replied sternly. "Your proximity and knowledge make you complicit." The room erupted into murmurs. Poirot raised a hand in silence. "The murder was not a single act, but a tapestry of deception. Financial greed, hidden lineage, and desperate attempts to silence truth. He paced once more. Dr. Fournier uncovered the secret of Monsieur Duval's birthright and the falsified inheritance. Madame Villiers sought to protect her family name, while Madame Montfort desired to maintain influence. Poirot's voice dropped, and Monsieur Beauregard, fearing exposure and loss, took drastic measures. Marcel's face paled. "You misunderstand. I was protecting someone." "Then who?" Poirot pressed. A tense silence. Finally, Marcel whispered, "Madame Montfort." Gasps filled the room. Madame Montfort's eyes flashed with anger. "You betray me, Marcel?" Poirot nodded. "Yes. You orchestrated threats, attempted poisoning, and manipulated the will to secure your position." Madame Villiers stood, voice trembling. "Enough! This infighting will destroy us all." Poirot's gaze was unwavering. "It is destruction that reveals the truth, madame. Now, I must ask the authorities to secure the house and take statements." Inspector Lefebvre stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, we will detain Madame Montfort and Monsieur Beauregard for questioning." As the guests were escorted away, Celeste approached Poirot. "Thank you, monsieur. You have brought light to the darkness." Poirot smiled gently. "Justice is served, but the wounds remain." Outside, the stone gargoyles watched silently, their chimeric faces etched with the burden of centuries. The mystery was solved, but its echoes would linger long in the halls of Château de l'Écarlate. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. The chill of the night seeped into every corner of Château de l'Écarlate as the household settled uneasily after the storm of revelations that had rocked the evening. The grand walls, once protective, now seemed like a cage closing in on those within. Whispers drifted like ghosts through the dimly lit corridors, while shadows clung to the ancient stone gargoyles perched silently above. Poirot sat alone in his study, the soft ticking of the antique clock the only sound accompanying his deep contemplation. The threads of the mystery had tangled and unraveled in unexpected ways, and yet a lingering unease gnawed at his mind. Something remained unsettled, a missing piece yet to be uncovered. A sharp knock broke the stillness. Inspector Lefebvre entered, his expression grave. "Monsieur Poirot, we have an urgent situation." Poirot rose, his gaze steady. "Speak, Inspector." "Madame Montfort has been found attempting to flee the château. Our servants intercepted her near the east gate, where a carriage awaited. She carried several sealed documents which she refused to surrender." Poirot's eyes narrowed. A desperate attempt to escape, no doubt. They hurried to the main hall where Madame Montfort sat, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes flashing with defiance, yet shadowed by fear. "Madame," Poirot began gently, "your flight only deepens suspicion. Care to explain your actions?" She met his gaze squarely. "I am no criminal, Monsieur Poirot. I sought only to protect what is mine by right." "Rights that, in your view, justify deceit and murder?" Poirot countered softly. Her eyes darkened. "You know nothing of the burdens I carry." Before the conversation could continue, Celeste Fournier entered, her face pale but resolute. "Monsieur Poirot, while you were consulting Madame Montfort, I discovered something in my father's study, a hidden compartment containing letters that speak of a secret alliance between Madame Montfort and Henri Duval." Poirot's interest piqued. A conspiracy, perhaps. Celeste handed him a bundle of aged letters sealed with wax. Poirot scanned the contents swiftly, cryptic discussions of wealth, power, and silencing opposition. "Indeed," Poirot murmured. "The web grows thicker." Henri Duval appeared, his face stern. "This is preposterous. I have no alliance with Madame Montfort beyond business." Poirot's eyes fixed on him, yet the correspondence suggests otherwise. "Secrets can be dangerous, monsieur." Henri's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Poirot then addressed the room. Madame Montfort's attempted escape is a confession in itself. She feared exposure and punishment. Madame Montfort's voice broke. I acted out of desperation. The estate, my reputation, everything is at stake. Poirot nodded gravely. Desperation breeds reckless acts. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the upper corridor. The group rushed toward the sound to find Marcel Beauregard frantically attempting to shove a heavy bookcase against a door. "Marcel, what is this?" Poirot demanded. The artist's eyes were wild. "I cannot let them find it. The room behind this door holds truth that will destroy us all." Inspector Lefebvre moved swiftly, pulling Marcel away. "You're under arrest." Marcel struggled. "No, you don't understand. They forced me to act." Poirot's gaze pierced the artist's frantic facade. "Who are they, Marcel? Speak truthfully." Marcel's shoulders sagged. "Madame Montfort and Henri. They threatened me if I revealed what was hidden here." Poirot nodded slowly. "Then the conspiracy is deeper than we thought." Together, they pried open the door behind the bookcase to reveal a small chamber lined with old trunks, dusty ledgers, and faded portraits. Celeste stepped inside cautiously, running her fingers over a worn journal. "This belonged to my grandfather," she whispered. "It details the true history of the estate and the falsified will." Poirot examined the journal closely. "Here lies the motive for murder: inheritance, power, and the desperate desire to erase inconvenient truths." As the night deepened, guards secured the chateau. Madame Montfort and Marcel Beauregard were taken into custody. Henri remained under close watch, and Celeste found a measure of solace in the uncovered legacy. Poirot stood once more beneath the gaze of the stone gargoyles, their grotesque faces bathed in moonlight. "Justice has taken a winding path, but it arrives nonetheless," he murmured. "Yet the echoes of this night will haunt these stones long after we have gone." The chateau seemed to exhale, as if relieved, or perhaps resigned to the unending secrets it bore. Poirot turned away, his mind already turning to the final revelations yet to come. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The dawn broke over Château de l'Écarlate, pale and tentative, as if hesitant to cast light on the grim proceedings of the night before. Within the heavy stone walls, a silence more profound than any spoken words settled over the household. The air was thick with anticipation and dread. The tangled threads of betrayal, greed, and deceit were weaving tighter, and Hercule Poirot's little grey cells were working tirelessly to untangle the final knots. In the grand study, Poirot sat at the heavy mahogany desk, the journal of Celeste's grandfather open before him. The leather-bound tome was heavy with dust, its pages yellowed and brittle, yet within lay the key to the entire labyrinthine mystery. Celeste sat quietly nearby, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. Poirot read aloud a passage from the journal, his voice steady and deliberate. "It speaks of the original will of the Villiers estate, composed over a century ago, which was to grant ownership not solely by bloodline but by merit and character. However, subsequent generations, driven by greed, altered the will in secret, forging a document that favored certain heirs while disinheriting others." He paused, tapping a finger on the page. "This falsification has been the catalyst for much suffering and deception. The real heir was hidden away, and this secret was fiercely guarded." Celeste looked up, voice barely a whisper. Monsieur Duval's secret lineage. He was the rightful heir all along. Poirot nodded gravely. "Indeed. But someone wished to keep this truth buried. Dr. Fournier's investigations threatened to expose the forgery, and so the murder was committed to silence him." Inspector Lefebvre entered quietly, carrying a small parcel. "Monsieur Poirot, we found this hidden among Madame Montfort's belongings. It appears to be correspondence, letters and ledgers." Poirot carefully unfolded the papers, his eyes scanning swiftly. These confirm the alliance between Madame Montfort and Henri Duval to conceal the truth and manipulate the estate's fortune. Yet the motives alone do not complete the puzzle. He laid the papers aside and leaned back. The murder weapon was never found, nor was there evidence of a direct struggle. Someone staged the scene with calculated precision. Celeste's brow furrowed. But why did Marcel Beauregard act as he did, trying to block the secret chamber's door? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Fear, mademoiselle. Marcel was coerced, but also hoped to protect someone. He turned to Inspector Lefebvre. Have we questioned the servants thoroughly? The inspector nodded. Yes, monsieur. One servant reported seeing a shadowy figure near the staircase shortly before the scream. The figure was wearing a cloak. Poirot's mouth twitched into a faint smile. Ah, the cloak. A final piece of the puzzle. He rose and walked to the window, gazing out over the rain-soaked grounds. The murderer sought to mislead and confuse, but in the haste to conceal, a critical error was made. He turned suddenly, voice sharp. Who had access to such a cloak? Who could move unseen? The room was silent. Poirot approached Henri Duval. Monsieur, it is known that you possess such a cloak, an heirloom passed down through the Villiers family. Henri's face paled, and his eyes flickered with a mixture of guilt and defiance. I deny nothing. Poirot continued. You confronted Dr. Fournier that evening, knowing he was close to unveiling your true heritage and the fraudulent will. Henri's voice was low. I acted to protect my birthright. By murder? Poirot's question hung heavy. Henri bowed his head. It was a moment of desperation. Poirot's gaze shifted to Madame Montfort. And you, Madame, provided the poison to silence further inquiry. Madame Montfort's composure faltered. I did what was necessary to preserve the family name. Poirot turned to Marcel Beauregard. You were coerced into aiding this plot, but ultimately your conscience prevailed. Marcel nodded slowly. Yes, I feared the consequences if I spoke out. Celeste stepped forward, voice trembling but firm. Monsieur Poirot, what now becomes of Château de l'Écarlate? Poirot smiled gently. Truth must be restored. The rightful heir must claim what is theirs, and justice must take its course. He looked once more at the ancient gargoyles perched above the chateau, their grotesque faces bearing silent witness. The stones remember all, and they have watched patiently. Tonight, the truth emerges from the shadows. As the household absorbed the gravity of the moment, Poirot prepared to reveal the full sequence of events, the intricate dance of lies, greed, and fear that had culminated in tragedy. He gathered everyone once again in the grand salon, where the flickering fire cast warm light on tense faces. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, I shall now recount the true story. He spoke with precision, reconstructing the timeline, unveiling motives, and exposing deceptions. The guests listened, rapt, as the layers peeled away to reveal the stark reality beneath. When he finished, the room was silent. Finally, Celeste whispered, Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You have given us justice. Poirot bowed slightly. It is my duty, mademoiselle. And now, peace may return to Château de l'Écarlate. The rain ceased outside, and the first light of dawn warmed the horizon. The gargoyles, frozen in stone, seemed almost to soften in the morning glow, their watch complete. For now. Chapter 15. The final gathering. The air inside Château de l'Écarlate was thick with expectation as evening fell once more. The great hall was transformed into a solemn theatre, its high ceilings echoing with the quiet shuffle of footsteps and the murmured breaths of those summoned to witness the final act of this dark drama. Heavy velvet drapes were drawn against the creeping night, and the flicker of candlelight cast shifting shadows upon the faces gathered. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the long oak table, his posture erect, his eyes bright and unwavering. His little grey cells had spun the threads of this complex tapestry into a clear and damning design. Now the time had come to unravel it fully and lay bare the truth for all to see. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice steady and commanding attention, "we have traversed a labyrinth of lies, deceit, and hidden motives. Tonight I shall reveal the true sequence of events that led to the tragic death of Dr. Émile Fournier." He paused, scanning the room, catching the flicker of unease in several eyes. Henri Duval's clenched jaw, Madame Villiers' pale resolve, Madame Montfort's carefully controlled composure, and even Celeste's trembling hands. Let us recall. Dr. Fournier's discovery threatened the foundations of a carefully guarded secret, the falsified Villiers family will, which deprived the rightful heir of their inheritance. The rightful heir, as revealed, was Monsieur Henri Duval, whose lineage had been concealed to protect appearances. Poirot took a measured breath before continuing. "Monsieur Duval, you admitted your desperation to preserve your position and reputation, but desperation alone does not explain murder." He turned to Madame Montfort. "Madame Montfort, your alliance with Monsieur Duval to suppress this truth led you to commit acts of sabotage, including the attempted poisoning and destruction of evidence. You believed that by protecting the false narrative, your influence and power would remain unchallenged." The room's tension tightened as Poirot's gaze fixed on Marcel Beauregard. "Monsieur Beauregard, you were drawn unwillingly into this web, coerced by threats. Your attempt to block the discovery of the secret chamber was a desperate effort to protect yourself and, in your view, others." A sigh escaped Marcel's lips, shoulders slumping under the weight of guilt. Poirot's voice grew firmer. "Now, the murder itself. On the night in question, Dr. Fournier confronted Monsieur Duval, accusing him of usurpation and demanding the truth be made public. A struggle ensued near the grand staircase. The fatal wound was inflicted in a moment of rage and fear." He pointed toward Henri. "In your panic, you dropped the Villiers cufflink, a token of your true identity and the fatal slip that betrayed you." Henri's face was drained of color. "Yes, I killed him, but it was not premeditated. I acted to protect my birthright." Poirot nodded gravely. "A tragic mistake fueled by greed and fear." He turned once more to the assembly. "Yet justice must be tempered with understanding. Monsieur Duval, your confession brings closure, but it also demands reckoning." The inspector stepped forward. "Monsieur Duval, you will be taken into custody, and the law will decide your fate." Celeste, tears glistening in her eyes, whispered, "I only wish for the truth to heal the wounds." Poirot smiled gently at her. "And heal it will, through justice and revelation." Madame Villiers rose slowly. "The estate will carry this sorrow, but it will also carry hope. The truth, though painful, is the foundation upon which we rebuild." The group nodded solemnly. Poirot moved to the window, gazing outward at the stone gargoyles silhouetted against the moonlit sky. Their grotesque faces, frozen in eternal vigil, seemed less menacing now, guardians of a truth finally unveiled. He turned back, addressing the assembly with finality. "May this night serve as a reminder, no secret, no matter how deeply buried, can withstand the relentless pursuit of truth." As the gathering slowly dispersed, Poirot lingered, reflecting on the human frailty and complexity he had witnessed. Justice, he knew, was not merely the enforcement of law, but the illumination of human nature in all its light and shadow. The chateau, ancient and stoic, settled into quiet once more. The story of betrayal, ambition, and redemption would become part of its long history, whispered among the stones and carried on the wind. Poirot's work was done. His little grey cells had triumphed, and the night's shadows receded with the coming dawn. Chapter 16. The Reveal. The dawn was slow to break over Château de l'Écarlate, casting a soft grey light that filtered through the heavy drapes and pooled upon the polished floor of the Grand Salon. Outside, the early mist clung to the ancient stone walls, wrapping the estate in a shroud of quiet anticipation. Inside, a charged stillness hovered, a fragile calm before the storm of truth was to be unleashed. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his presence small but unmistakably commanding. His piercing eyes scanned the faces gathered before him. Henri Duval, now subdued and weary. Madame Villiers, pale but dignified. Celeste Fournier, resolute despite the weight of grief. Madame Montfort, her composure stretched thin. Marcel Beauregard, haunted and repentant. And Inspector Lefebvre, steady and attentive. The room held its breath, waiting for Poirot's final words. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice measured and deliberate. "We have journeyed through shadows and deception, and now, at last, the truth must emerge fully. The story I'm about to recount is complex, layered with hidden motives and tangled relationships. It demands your full attention." He took a slow breath. "Let us begin with Dr. Émile Fournier, a man of great intellect and courage, who dedicated his last days to uncovering a truth that many wished to conceal, the true history of Château de l'Écarlate and the rightful inheritance of the Villiers estate." Poirot's gaze settled on Celeste. "Mademoiselle, your father's work threatened to reveal a falsified will, a document manipulated to disinherit the true heir and secure power for others." Celeste nodded solemnly. Poirot continued, "The rightful heir, as hidden within your grandfather's journal and corroborated by the documents found in the secret chamber, is none other than Monsieur Henri Duval, a fact concealed to maintain appearances and control." Henri's face tightened, but he said nothing. "Now, the motive," Poirot said, his voice sharpening. "Monsieur Duval, faced with exposure and loss of status, conspired with Madame Montfort, whose own ambitions intertwined with the estate's fate. Together, they sought to silence Dr. Fournier before his revelations could come to light. Madame Montfort's lips pressed into a thin line, but she remained silent. Poirot's tone grew firm. The murder was not a crime of passion, but one of calculated desperation. On the night of the tragedy, Monsieur Duval confronted Dr. Fournier near the grand staircase. The argument escalated, and in a moment of rage and fear, the fatal wound was inflicted. He gestured toward Henri. In his haste, Monsieur Duval dropped the Villiers family cufflink, a seemingly insignificant token, but a crucial piece of evidence. The room was silent. Poirot turned to Madame Montfort. "You, Madame, orchestrated attempts to conceal the truth, including an attempted poisoning and destruction of critical documents. Your actions were driven by a desire to preserve influence and wealth." Madame Montfort's eyes flickered with defiance, but her voice remained measured. "I did what was necessary to protect my family's legacy." Poirot shook his head gently. "Protection does not justify betrayal in murder." He shifted his attention to Marcel Beauregard. "Monsieur Beauregard, you were coerced into complicity, your fear exploited. Your attempts to block discovery of the secret chamber delayed justice, but ultimately your conscience prevailed." Marcel's face was etched with remorse. "I acted out of fear, but I could no longer live with the deception." Poirot nodded, acknowledging the confession. "And confession is the first step toward redemption." He raised his hand for silence. The puzzle, however, is not complete without understanding the subtle but significant role of Madame Villiers. Though not directly involved in the murder, her knowledge and influence shaped much of the clandestine activity surrounding the estate. Madame Villiers' eyes were steady as Poirot continued. "Your desire to shield your family's reputation led to silence and concealment, contributing indirectly to the tragedy." A hush fell over the room as the gravity of Poirot's words settled. Poirot paced slowly, the firelight flickering across his thoughtful face. This mystery reveals the fragile balance between loyalty and ambition, love and betrayal. It is a testament to the human capacity for both good and evil. He paused before the gathered group. Justice, in its truest form, must acknowledge all facets of truth, the actions, the motives, the consequences. Celeste spoke softly. "Monsieur Poirot, how will justice be served now?" Poirot met her gaze kindly. "The law will take its course regarding Monsieur Duval and Madame Montfort. Marcel Beauregard's cooperation will be considered, and Madame Villiers must reconcile her conscience with her choices." He looked around the room one last time. This chateau, these stones, have witnessed many secrets over the centuries. Tonight, a new chapter begins, a chapter of truth and reconciliation. The first light of morning crept through the windows, illuminating faces marked by sorrow, relief, and reflection. Poirot stepped toward the window, breathing deeply. Outside, the stone gargoyles, grotesque and eternal, seemed to soften in the gentle dawn. Their watch had ended for now. Turning back to the room, Poirot offered a final thought. "May we all learn that even the most carefully constructed facades crumble before the light of truth." As the guests dispersed quietly, each to face the consequences of their actions, the weight of the mystery lifted, leaving in its place a fragile hope. Poirot remained, contemplating the enduring complexity of human nature, a puzzle far more intricate than any crime. The little grey cells had triumphed once more. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. The atmosphere in Château de l'Écarlate had shifted perceptibly in the days following the revelations. The grandeur of the estate seemed dimmed, as if burdened by the weight of the secrets it had harbored for so long. The stone gargoyles that perched stoically atop the ancient walls remained unmoved, their grotesque visages bearing silent witness to the human frailties that had unfolded beneath them. Inside, life continued, but was forever altered. Henri Duval, once a figure of wealth and influence, was now confined under guard, awaiting formal charges for the murder of Dr. Émile Fournier. Madame Montfort, too, faced the consequences of her actions, her complicity in the conspiracy laid bare. Marcel Beauregard, having confessed fully and cooperated with the authorities, had been granted leniency, but the shadow of guilt weighed heavily upon him. Celeste Fournier, though shattered by loss, found solace in the knowledge that her father's legacy would finally be honored and justice served. Hercule Poirot remained at the chateau, overseeing the final stages of the investigation and preparing to depart once his work was complete. The great detective's presence was a steady reassurance to those still grappling with the aftermath. One morning, Poirot met with Inspector Lefebvre in the study, the room quiet save for the soft ticking of an old clock. "Monsieur Lefebvre," Poirot began, "the course of justice is as delicate as it is firm. It must punish wrongdoing but also acknowledge the complexities of human nature." The inspector nodded. "Monsieur Poirot, your insights have been invaluable. The prosecution's case is strong, yet there remains the task of addressing the hearts and minds of those affected." Poirot smiled slightly. Indeed, justice must heal as well as judge. That afternoon, a hearing was held in the Grand Salon. The local magistrate presided over the proceedings, and the chateau's key figures gathered once more. Henri Duval appeared pale but composed, his eyes betraying a storm of emotions beneath a veneer of stoicism. Madame Montfort maintained her dignity, though the strain was evident. The magistrate addressed the assembly. "Monsieur Duval, you stand accused of the murder of Dr. Émile Fournier. How do you plead?" Henri's voice was steady, though tinged with remorse. "Guilty, Your Honor. I deeply regret the pain my actions have caused." The magistrate turned to Madame Montfort. "Madame, you face charges of conspiracy, attempted poisoning, and obstruction of justice. How do you plead?" "Guilty," she replied, her voice unwavering. "I accept responsibility for my part in this tragedy." Marcel Beauregard spoke next, his confession complete and heartfelt. The magistrate nodded solemnly. "Given the circumstances and your cooperation, leniency will be considered." Celeste Fournier stood silently nearby, her expression composed, though her eyes shimmered with tears. After the formalities, Poirot addressed the gathered group. "The verdict is only one aspect of justice. True justice involves acknowledgement, repentance, and the commitment to rebuild." Madame Villiers stepped forward, voice resolute. "The estate will honor Dr. Fournier's memory and commit to transparency and renewal." Celeste spoke softly. "My father sought truth above all. It is my hope that his sacrifice will guide us forward." Over the following weeks, changes took root. The estate's management was restructured under Celeste's guidance, with a renewed focus on integrity and openness. The truth about the Villiers' inheritance was made public, restoring Henri Duval's rightful place in history, albeit overshadowed by his crimes. Madame Montfort's influence waned, and Marcel Beauregard withdrew from public life, seeking solace in quiet reflection. Poirot prepared to depart, his task complete. Before leaving, he met privately with Celeste. "Mademoiselle, you bear a heavy burden, but also a great strength," he said kindly. "Your father's legacy and your courage will inspire new beginnings." Celeste smiled faintly. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Without you, truth might have remained forever hidden." As Poirot mounted his carriage, the first light of dawn painted the chateau in soft hues. The gargoyles above seemed less menacing in the gentle morning glow. Poirot leaned back, the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves a comforting cadence. Justice had been served. But the lessons of Château de l'Écarlate would linger, a reminder of the shadows that dwell within us all. And so, the great detective's little grey cells once again brought light to darkness, ensuring that truth, though often hidden, could never be extinguished. Chapter 18. The Closing Remark. The final light of dusk settled gently over Château de l'Écarlate, casting the ancient stones and their twisted gargoyles in a warm amber glow. The estate, once the stage for dark secrets and bitter betrayals, now seemed to breathe a quiet sigh, as if releasing the weight of the mysteries that had consumed it. The shadows had fled, replaced by the delicate softening of truth laid bare. Inside the great hall, the assembled guests remained silent. The heavy drapes were drawn, muffling the world beyond, and focusing every gaze on Hercule Poirot, who stood before them with his usual calm and dignity. His little grey cells, ever sharp, ever perceptive, had worked tirelessly through layers of deception, and now they prepared to unveil the final truth. Poirot began, his voice measured and clear, filling the grand room. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have all been part of a sorrowful journey, one that has brought to light not only a crime, but the human frailties and passions that led to it." He paused, letting the gravity of the moment settle. "This chateau has borne witness to many things over centuries, joy and grief, honor and shame. Tonight, it witnesses justice." He directed his gaze toward Celeste Fournier, whose eyes reflected a fierce mix of grief and resilience. "Mademoiselle, your father's pursuit of truth has inspired us all, and it is through your courage that justice has been served." Celeste inclined her head, steady despite the sorrow etched into her features. Poirot's attention swept the room, resting on Henri Duval, now diminished, yet not entirely broken, and Madame Montfort, whose refined composure barely concealed the storm within. Marcel Beauregard sat quietly, shadows of guilt in his eyes. "Let me recount the chain of events that brought us here." He gestured toward Henri. "Monsieur Duval, you concealed your true heritage to protect a fragile legacy, one not truly yours. When Dr. Fournier threatened to expose the falsified will, you acted out of desperation, resulting in murder. Henri's face tightened, but he met Poirot's eyes with a weary acceptance. Poirot then turned to Madame Montfort. "Madame, your ambition and desire to preserve influence led you to take measures both covert and deadly. Your complicity in attempts to silence Dr. Fournier and obstruct the truth cannot be excused." Madame Montfort's eyes flashed, yet she said nothing. He moved to Marcel. "Monsieur Beauregard, your role was a painful one, coerced into silence, yet your conscience brought you here to confess. Your courage in the end reflects the better part of human nature." Marcel bowed his head, a silent acknowledgement. Poirot then addressed the room with a softer tone. "Madame Villiers, though not directly involved, your willful ignorance and protection of secrets contributed to the tragedy. The desire to guard a family's reputation cannot justify the cost it exacts on innocent lives." Madame Villiers met his gaze steadily, a trace of remorse in her eyes. Poirot paced slowly. "This mystery has taught us that the quest for truth is seldom easy or painless. It reveals the darkness that hides in the hearts of men and women, but also the light that can emerge through courage and honesty." He turned to Celeste. "The estate you now steward carries both the burden of the past and the promise of renewal." Celeste's voice was clear. "I will honor my father's memory by ensuring that this legacy is one of truth and integrity." Poirot smiled faintly. A noble endeavor indeed. The great hall remained silent, each person absorbing the profound significance of the moment. Outside, the gargoyles' grotesque faces were softened by the moonlight, as if granting their silent blessing to the new dawn. Poirot continued, "Justice is a delicate balance. It must punish wrongdoing, yes, but also offer a path to redemption. May we all learn from this tale the importance of integrity over ambition and truth over deception." He raised his hand in farewell. "And now, I must depart, but I leave you with his final thought. The little grey cells do not rest, and the pursuit of justice is never finished." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the guests. Later, as Poirot prepared to leave, he found a moment alone with Celeste on the terrace. The night was cool, the stars shimmering like distant lanterns. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," she said quietly, "for bringing light to the darkness." Poirot's smile was gentle. "It is the honor of my life, mademoiselle. May your path be guided by truth and courage." The carriage awaited, and as Poirot took his seat, he glanced back at the chateau one last time. The stones had spoken, secrets unveiled, and justice served. With a contented sigh, Hercule Poirot disappeared into the breaking dawn, his little grey cells already turning to the mysteries yet to come. Chapter 19. Epilogue. Echoes beneath the stone. The golden light of late afternoon draped Château de la Carlette in a warm embrace, softening the ancient stone gargoyles that stood sentinel above the gardens. Their twisted faces, once symbols of menace and mystery, now seemed less foreboding, more like silent witnesses to the passage of time and the secrets long held within the estate's walls. Celeste Fournier walked slowly along the gravel path, her footsteps light but purposeful. The events of recent weeks had transformed her life and the chateau forever. The shadows that had haunted this place were lifting, replaced by a fragile hope and the promise of renewal. She paused beneath the largest gargoyle, its worn features carved with grotesque artistry, and reached out to touch the cool stone. Her fingers traced the deep grooves, feeling the weight of history embedded there. "This place has borne witness to so much," she whispered. "Pain, betrayal, but also courage and truth." Her thoughts drifted to her father, Dr. Émile Fournier, whose relentless quest for truth had sparked a chain of events that culminated in both tragedy and justice. Though he was gone, his legacy endured, etched not only in dusty journals and forgotten chambers, but in the very soul of the estate. The chateau itself seemed to breathe with a new life. The management, now under Celeste's careful stewardship, embraced transparency and integrity. Old secrets were no longer shackles but lessons, guiding the estate toward a future grounded in honesty. Inside the great hall, portraits of the Villiers' ancestors were being restored with reverence. Nearby, a framed photograph of Dr. Fournier had been placed alongside a commemorative plaque honoring his sacrifice. The local villagers, once wary, now spoke of l'Écarlate with renewed respect, hopeful that the dark chapters had closed. Celeste's days were full, meetings, correspondence, and plans to revitalize the estate, but she sought moments of quiet refuge in the gardens. The gargoyles, once ominous, had become symbols of resilience and guardianship. Their faces reminded her that beneath every twisted exterior lies a story, often hidden but waiting patiently to be told. One evening, as twilight descended and stars began to prick the velvet sky, Celeste found herself drawn to the secret chamber's entrance. The heavy stone door, once a portal to mystery and danger, now stood sealed but preserved as a testament to the estate's complex history. She knelt by the base of the wall, gently brushing away moss and fallen leaves, her fingers lingering on the cold stone. The breeze whispered softly through the trees, carrying with it faint echoes of the past. Suddenly, footsteps approached behind her. She turned to see Inspector Lefebvre, his expression calm and kind. "Mademoiselle Fournier," he said, voice gentle, "it is heartening to see you finding peace amidst the lingering shadows." Celeste smiled, though her eyes bore traces of the sorrow she carried. "Peace is a journey, Inspector. I hope to travel with courage." They stood together in companionable silence, watching the last light fade from the gardens. Lefebvre continued, "This chateau holds many stories, layers of history entwined with human nature's complexities. Each stone, each gargoyle, has witnessed whispers, secrets, and truths that shape the present." Celeste's gaze lifted to the gargoyle above them, its face worn by time, yet eternal. "Do you think those shadows will ever truly rest?" The inspector considered this. "Perhaps not entirely. Some secrets linger, like echoes beneath the stone. But with each truth we uncover, the burden lightens." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle within her. As night deepened, the gardens grew quiet. The stars emerged brighter, scattering silver across the dark canvas above. Celeste felt a quiet strength growing inside, a resolve to honor her father's legacy by guiding the estate into a future defined by openness and integrity. Walking slowly back toward the chateau, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The path ahead was long and uncertain, but illuminated by the hard-won truth and the promise of healing. Back inside, the grand hall was prepared for the final gathering. Friends, family, and villagers came together to mark a new beginning. There were speeches, soft music, and moments of shared remembrance. Tears mingled with smiles as the community embraced a chapter defined by resilience. Later, Celeste stood by a window, gazing out over the estate. The gargoyles, silhouetted against the night sky, seemed to watch over the land with steadfast vigilance. She whispered, "Thank you, Father. Your courage has not been in vain." Across the chateau in a quiet chamber, Hercule Poirot prepared for his departure. His work here was complete, the mystery resolved with elegance and precision. Yet, even as he packed his belongings, his mind was already turning to new puzzles, new shadows waiting to be lifted. He paused, reflecting on the nature of justice and human frailty. Justice, he thought, is never simply a matter of right and wrong. It is a delicate balance of truth, mercy, and understanding. The carriage awaited, its horses pawing softly at the cobblestones. Poirot stepped outside, taking a final look at the estate bathed in moonlight. The gargoyles stood sentinel, eternal and unyielding. With a serene smile, Poirot settled into the carriage. As the vehicle rolled away, he cast one last glance at Château de l'Écarlate. The stones had spoken, the shadows had lifted, and the little grey cells had triumphed once more.